Ray tracing in Crimson Desert cuts performance by 30 to 35%. However, it's really just used for ray trace global illumination. Ray trace reflections are only used for semi-glossy reflections, while mirror-like and super glossy reflections fall back to screen space reflections. When it comes to shadows, they are only really just used for indoor scenes using artificial lights, while sun shadows are really just cascaded shadow maps with some artificial overview adjustments. Without ray reconstruction, ray tracing is often low quality, lacking detail, and tends to break indoors, causing temporal artifacts like these. Ray traced global illumination or diffuse lighting is the most important ray traced effect. It essentially deals with how areas that are shadowed or occluded from the sun or direct light sources get lit indirectly. So in this case, this area here is all lit directly by the sun. Rays from the sun hit it directly without any obstacles, and it's called direct lighting. Whereas this area here is shadowed. It's lit indirectly. Light rays, after they come from the sun and they hit these areas here that are directly lit, bounce off these directly lit surfaces and go on to illuminate these areas, these occluded areas, indirectly. That's indirect or diffuse lighting. Ray trace global illumination has a pretty substantial impact on the lighting of shadowed and occluded surfaces despite incorporating a single bounce. Here, for example, the shadowed area under the tent is much more uniformly lit with indirect light. You'll see the same effect in the distance on that other tent. Ray traced GI helps illuminate it more uniformly. In the background, the fort wall is also more uniformly and accurately lit with more complex diffuse shadows closer to the arches and the edges. You can see that the lighting global illumination has a diffuse and specular element. So while the tables and the ground that's wooden get illuminated diffusely, the shiny objects like these steel surfaces get a specular element. They get partial reflections, these glossy reflections. Same for the armor sets in the background. Furthermore, if you look at the shields, these are wooden shields, so they get a sunlit colored yellowish tint, while a lot of these walls in the background get a whitish tint, not a sunlight colored yellowish tint. That's because this light is bounced off of other white surfaces, like other parts of the wall, and you get this white colored tint rather than the sunlight colored tint. The same can be seen on the tent. The tent gets a whitish tint because it's bounced off of white colored surfaces, because of which all the shadowed surfaces here get a whitish tint. Wall here in the distance doesn't do that. It gets a yellowish tint with ray tracing because it's not bounced off of white colored surfaces. We see a similar impact with the global illumination in this scene. The ground is getting light that's reflected off of white colored surfaces, so it receives a whitish hue because white surfaces reflect all colors equally and absorb very little light, so it's illuminated with a white colored hue. Here you can see that near the garden, the edges get deep shadows. These are the diffuse shadows produced by the bounce lighting because they can't reach these areas, so they get shadows instead. The wall here of the building that's farther away, it gets a yellowish colored tint because it's receiving light that's bounced off of other non-white surfaces, which tend to absorb other colors, leaving the yellowish color intact, which gets this yellowish tint. You'll see that ray tracing adds deeper and more detailed shadows along the rock patterns on the building walls. This is because of the finer intersections, finer bounces that are cast off of these edges. The edges block the light, and these shadows are cast as a result of the light being blocked. Crimson Desert doesn't have a ray tracing quality slider. However, the upscaling quality has the same impact, substantially altering the lighting quality. Ray reconstruction is mainly meant to fix this by accounting for the fewer rays when you're using upscaling, casting fewer rays at a lower resolution and then upscaling it without adding additional rays for the upscaled resolution, but it doesn't seem to be doing that in this case. As a result, DLSS quality mode and DLAA to a much greater extent produce much higher quality lighting than DLSS performance mode. Not only are the surfaces more thoroughly lit, the shadows are also more detailed. Ray Trace global illumination is much more transformative indoors, where most of the surfaces are lit indirectly, either by natural light or by artificial light sources like lamps or candles. Here on the right side of the room, you can see that the natural light coming from the window illuminates this area with a whitish tint, while the area immediately around these candles gets a yellowish tint. Closer to the player, where the player is carrying a lamp which emits a yellowish light, you get a yellowish tint in the immediate vicinity. You can also see the specular component being reflected on the tiles here. There's some more light coming from upstairs, and this other window here, this is natural light and it's mostly white or whitish yellow. You can see that the shadows cast by the diffuse light are particularly dark because this is only single bounce lighting, and it doesn't bounce more than once to illuminate other occluded and cornered areas, which is only possible with path tracing or multi-bounce GI. As seen earlier, DLSS quality and DLAA deliver substantially higher quality ray tracing than DLSS balanced and performance mode. The amount of light in the scene, especially in indoor scenes, is particularly higher. Indoor scenes with scattered sources of light look completely different with RTGI enabled. The scene is much more brighter and uniformly lit, while the indoor scene without RTGI just looks like it only has the indoor light sources, completely ignoring the outdoor light source. Even here, DLAA and DLSS-Q deliver substantially more lighting detail than DLSS performance and balanced mode. Not only is the light able to reach more of the corners and crevices, it also renders more detailed shadows along these cupboards, while also including a more precise colored light bleeding effect that incorporates both the indoor light and the outdoor light. Without RTGI, outdoor scenes look rather bare and dull towards the evenings and early mornings. RTGI adds much needed light to the roofs and walls that are fairly unobscured, making them well illuminated. Corners, crevices, and other arch structures get detailed shadows that add much needed depth. However, foliage is the most impacted by diffuse light out of all the other objects. Global illumination with its finer shadows adds much more depth and detail to these foliage and grasses, bushes, trees, which otherwise look rather two-dimensional. For the grass patches here, you can see that RTGI not only makes the blades of grass more color-rich and illuminated, but also adds individual, highly detailed shadows for each of them. This substantially improves the realism of vegetation and foliage in mid-light scenes. For far-off scenes, the farther you go, the more the shadow detail drops, and more illumination is retained instead. Going from DLSS performance to quality or DLAA substantially not only improves the global illumination lighting detail, but also the diffuse shadow detail. The distance the rays travel, the ray depth also increases with DLAA, and we see more detailed shadows at distances farther away from the player. Despite incorporating a single bounce, RTGI substantially improves the shadow detail, ambient or diffuse shadow detail in low lit scenes. Here you can see that the crevices and corners and finer architectural details are much more finely shadowed with RTGI than without it. Much like global illumination, ray trace shadows are much more effective indoors where spotlight and point lights are used. These shadows are substantially more detailed than rasterized shadows, with much more accurate contact hardening. Outdoor sun shadows, however, are a disaster, and ray tracing doesn't really do much to help either. Ray traced shadows mainly make the umbra, the darker part of the shadows, darker or deeper, and they often worsen the flickering seen with level 2 cascades. Like, that's the cascade that's one away from the nearest one. Ray tracing tends to produce more contact hardeningly accurate soft shadows, but the flickering kind of undoes it all. The shadow flickering related with ray tracing shadows only stops when you move farther away from these shadows, at which point the shadow cascades switch to a lower detail version. Either that, or if you move really close to these shadows, at which point both the shadows ray traced on and versus off pretty much look the same, with the only difference being with respect to the umbra depth or darkness, which isn't really worth the massive performance hit. Crimson Desert continues to use shadow cascades even with ray tracing, with ray traced shadows mainly enhancing the cascade, the silhouette edges. Regardless, considering the short draw distance of shadows, the performance hit is way too severe, especially considering you're getting barely 60 FPS on an RTX 4090 with performance upscaling at 4K. Even when ray tracing is enabled, Crimson Desert continues to use screen space reflections for most specular mirror-like reflections. Ray traced reflections are only used for semi-specular or glossy surfaces like these plates of armor and these utensils. These specular semi-glossy reflections are often low quality and prone to flickering due to heavy temporal feedback.